Are you ready for a gush fest? I am. It's time to talk Age of Myth by Michael J. Sullivan. Welcome back, bienvenue and all that jazz. Today, I have for you a review of Age of Myth by Michael J. Sullivan, which is book 1 of the Legends of the First Empire series. And so, here's what she looks like. This is the start of the prequel to his prequel to his prequel series. So the author himself started with the Ryaria Revelations series featuring Royce and Hadrian. I haven't read them. I'll get to them. I'm kind of almost pseudo-reading these chronologically, but not really. Like, I don't really know where I'll go when I finish Legends of the First Empire. It just appealed to me the most out of all of his series because it's the most, like, epic fantasy sounding. So he has his Ryaria Revelation series, which he then later wrote a prequel series about how the two main characters in that series meet, Royce and Hadrian, and that is the Ryaria Chronicles. And then he wrote a prequel to that prequel, which is set thousands of years in advance, which is the Legends of the First Empire series. And now he is currently releasing a series that comes after this, but before his other prequel series. And that is, it starts with Nolan. I don't know anything about that one really. So we're here to talk Age of Myth by Michael J. Sullivan. And spoiler alert, I loved this book. So let's just dive straight into the spoiler-free part of this review. So I figure I'll do a spoiler-free portion, and then I'll mark it very clearly on the screen, and I'll talk a little bit of spoilers as well, because I feel like this book has been out long enough that people will hopefully engage with me and talk to me a little bit like spoiler-filled, because I love this book so much, and I just want to talk to more people about it. So let's talk Age of Myth. So typical review fashion. First up, let's talk world building and magic. So the world building in this series is actually kind of unique. I haven't read it very much in fantasy. It's actually more of like a almost Stone Age. So we have our humans and we have our elf-like creatures that they are called the Frey. And these two races basically remain entirely separate. So the humans are also known as the Runes. They are kind of sequestered on one side of this river, and it's kind of like the crap land, so things don't grow super well. Life is pretty hard. It's on the edge of this like really crazy forest that they grow up kind of fearing, and they live in separate, I want to say they call them clans for the humans. And so there's these different clans of humans, but they don't really work together. They almost kind of war with each other for the limited resources that they have. And this is all imposed on them by the magical Frey, who keep the humans separate because they're seen as barbaric. And then there's these Frey, and they don't really ever really intermix. The Frey is separated into multiple tribes, one of which is the Moraliath, which are the actual magic users of this world. And the magic itself is kind of hard to describe. It's not super duper prevalent in the first book. There are some awesome like magic duels, shall we say, and the magic system almost gives me vibes of almost like bending from Avatar: The Last Airbender, kind of mixed with the weaves from the Wheel of Time. Because they seem to like channel and weave these energies, and one of the ways that they practice their magic is by like playing with like almost like Cat's Cradle, like string games and stuff to practice manipulating these different weaves or whatever, what have you. And we haven't gotten super far into it yet, but I do know that this is a full 6-book series and it is completely finished. And so I'm imagining that we'll get more and more into the lore and more world building as time goes on. Michael J. Sullivan writes his books in a very interesting way. So he actually will completely outline, if not write, the entire series before he publishes the first book, because he feels that this gives him the opportunity to kind of go back and tweak details or add information if he has ideas that come to him later on in his writing process. And so you definitely get the feeling that there's like little sprinklings, and I bet like especially on reread you probably pick up on a lot of the foreshadowing that he does here. And I think one of the coolest things that I've heard that he does is if you skip if you start with the way that the books were published with the Rhyuria Revelations series, they tell tales of these legends of how the Empire came to be and all of this kind of stuff. And when you get to the legends of the First Empire, or vice versa, you get to see how these legends have morphed and maybe lost their truth or gotten inflated or changed or manipulated over time, because we all know that history is written by the victors. So I'm really curious to get the full scope of like what really happened, and then jump into Rhyuria Revelations to find out what do they think happened 3,000 years in the future. I think that's a really cool element that I don't know that I've ever seen in any other book that I've read. So I'm really excited for that. So I would say that his world building and his magic are lighter, especially in this first book, but you get enough that you're definitely intrigued and you can see that there's deeper lore there. So that's all I'll say about the world building and the magic. And then we move on to part 2, which is characters. And so in this book, I would say that we have maybe 4 main characters. So we have Arion, who is one of the Moraliath, who is the magical tutor to the Elven Prince. We have Wraith, who is part of one of the like more warrior-esque clans of the humans. We have Persephone, who is the wife of a chieftain of a different clan of humans. And then we have Suri and Minna, who Suri is a like mystic in training. So these different clans of humans sometimes have mystics that will help with probably healing herbs and like that kind of thing. And so Suri is she's being trained by a current mystic of one of these kind of clans. And she has a wonderful wolf companion named Minna. And so those are our 4 main characters. And Wraith especially starts off kind of annoying, I'm not gonna lie. But literally probably by about halfway through this book, I was in love with all of these characters. There is such nuance, especially to his female characters. I was really quite impressed by Michael J. Sullivan's ability to write female characters that feel like people. A lot of times, especially in more classic fantasy, which this feels more classic, but I don't think it is. I don't really know when it was published, but I think it was relatively recently, like in the 2000s. Yeah, so this is copyright 2016. So this is relatively recent, but it does feel very much like classic fantasy. But he has definitely managed to write unique and interesting female characters that aren't just either the like quiet type character, and they're not the really super aggressive, like badass warrior chick either. Not that there's anything wrong with either type of female character, but I like that his female characters are also nuanced and they all show fortitude and strength in their own ways. Persephone is the wife of a chieftain. Their society is very patriarchal, but she seems to have a role in how things happen in their clan. Minna and Suri. Suri is just this wild, free spirit. And then we have Arion, who is this kind of like almost aristocratic tutor of the Frey prince. And so they're all very unique and they all feel like really fleshed out and well done. And that's only from book 1. And I hear it just gets better and better from here, and that you will really feel for these characters by the end of the book. Or not by the end of the book, by the end of the series. And so I'm really excited to continue my journey. So then with that, we'll move into part 3, which is the plot. I will say that this is adult fantasy, and I would argue that it's adult fantasy and not YA, because I feel like YA typically has a teenaged-ish protagonist, and this definitely does not. There is Persephone, who's somewhere in her 30s or 40s, I would guess. There's Minna and Suri. Suri feels much younger, probably in that kind of teenage realm, but she's not really like the main protagonist or anything like that. I'm not totally sure how old Wraith is, but I'd say he's probably somewhere in his 20s. And then Arion is thousands of years old because she is part of the Moraliath Frey elven race who live for millennia. So none of these characters in particular feel super YA. I will say on the flip side of that, Michael J. Sullivan is not out to write some crazy, intensely detailed, complicated type stories. Nothing like Wheel of Time or Malazan or like anything super, you know what I mean? Like super dense or like difficult to digest. He writes very fast-paced, and kind of fun stories, I will say, but he also knows how to pack an emotional punch that you won't necessarily see coming. There were a couple moments in here where it was very much like, but Mr. Sullivan, why did you do that? Oh, like some of those moments hurt my heart, and I'll talk a little bit more about that when we get to the spoiler part of this video, but he will sucker you in with it feeling like this just fun classic fantasy and then punch you in the gut with all the feels. And so I thoroughly loved this beginning entry into the Legends of the First Empire. I'm so excited to continue on. I just need whoever has Age of Swords Book 2 from the library to turn it back in so I can read it. Okay, thanks. But just to wrap off this spoiler-free portion of the video, this book was a 5 out of 5 stars for me. I think that this may become like a new favorite series for me. I do just love the vibes of the world. You get these feelings of almost like fairy tale-esque moments and settings, and you're just learning about all of these races, and it feels like a very early point in time. And so I'm just excited to see how this really grows and we get the First Empire, because I'm assuming it's going to be epic AF. So really could not recommend more. And if you like books like this, like if you've read The Legends of the First Empire and Michael J. Sullivan, and you love this kind of story, I would highly recommend picking up stuff from the Forgotten Realms, be that the War of the Spider Queen or the Legend of Drizzt series or the Elminster saga. They have a similar vibe. And I get the impression that there may be gods walking amongst people in this series. And so if you really like that element, I mean, hello. So that being said, that wraps up the spoiler-free portion of this video. So if you have not read this book and you still plan to do so, thank you so much for watching, and I will talk to you again soon. But if you want to talk spoilers with me, let's do it. So spoilers. 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 Let's talk about it. So this book starts with the murder. So you get introduced to the Frey in a very like kind of confrontational manner, and you don't really understand who they are yet. And I was like, oh, Jesus. Like, it started with this like really horrible elf, and I was like, okay, damn, evil elves. That's not always the most typical thing, especially in these more classic fantasy books. So when they meet this like patrol of Frey, because Wraith and his dad are trying to burst into the Frey side of the river because it's like richer and they can live more easily. And the Frey kill his dad, and then Malcolm and Wraith kill this Frey together. They then flee back across the river to the human territories, where they basically start traveling around into the different clans of humans until they settle into the clan where Persephone is. Then if we jump to what's happening with Miss Persephone, her husband has been murdered by this bear that we are told is some kind of demon, and we don't know what's going on with that. And since her husband has died, a new chieftain has been named, and his wife, and they have all kinds of kind of semi-political, not like the most political intrigue type stuff, but there is like some political maneuvering between the new chieftain and his wife and Persephone, who has a hard time letting go because she really has, for the last 20 years, kind of shepherded the people in this clan, and she can't just like throw them to brand new leadership and not give them guidance, but then they don't love being guided. And so eventually we get to a point where Suri and Minna enter the picture. Suri has some kind of prophetic dream or something. I'm not totally clear on what it was, but she basically saw a storm coming, and she saw the name Grin involved. And so this bear that murdered Persephone's husband, they call Grin the Brown. And so it's thought that maybe this bear is the problem that's going to affect their clan. But we also find out that the Frey are furious that one of them was murdered, because the humans basically saw them as gods. And now they know that the Frey can be killed. And so the question is, are the humans going to band together and try to overthrow the Frey? We don't really know. But the Frey send a contingent of people, and they burn a bunch of the clans to the ground. And they end up sending Arion, our Moraliath tutor to the prince, to kind of see what's going on. And there's conflicts in the clan of them versus the Frey. They eventually get Arion on their side, and she helps fight, oh my god, face. I don't remember, Grindal. Him. Just him. He's so like, ugh. Okay, I hate him. And so I was so happy when he got his head cut off, and I was like, wait, but like in book 1, I thought that he was going to be like a much bigger threat kind of going throughout the series, not just like, bye Felicia. But it was so satisfying when it happened, and that was one of those like, yeah, moments when I was reading this book. And then of course we have the whole plot line where they try to deal with Grin the Brown, because they don't realize at first that Grin refers to Grindal, this Moraliath, who is an asshole. And so Suri and Minna go off to try to turn this bear back into a human, because at one point, one of the people in this village gave up their child, and they put it into the forest. And so Suri, being like this mystic who knows their folklore and history, says, oh, well, she must have been transformed into this demonic bear. And so they go off to try to change the bear back into a human. And then there's the moment where the bear swats that lady and she dies. But as she's dying, we come to find out that Suri is really her long-lost daughter. And poor Suri, she's just like a precious soul who likes to run around and look at her butterflies. And that moment was like... So like, I wasn't expecting that kind of like almost pseudo gut punch, but like, it was also what made this book like so good. I was like, oh, you're making me feel things. Oh, okay, Mr. Sullivan. And so that's basically the gist of this book. I loved all of it. I loved Suri's little squirrel, look over there, like just wandering through the forest, talking to trees, like so precious. And then Minna, who she calls the wisest wolf, who protects her and goes with her. Love it. Persephone is our vocal and strong leader woman who is like this patriarchal bullshit. Whatever, I'm chieftain now. And so I loved it where she was just like, are you gonna fight me? Like, bring it. Because it gets revealed that she is the one who killed the bear to her like tribe mates, and they're all like shocked and nobody wants to fight her for control because she killed this gigantic brown bear by herself. And so she is now going to be chieftain. And then we have our homeboy Wraith, who is in puppy dog love with Miss Persephone. He just loves everything about her. And that was one of those like sweet but sad moments when he's like, do you want to run away with me and we can have like a hut and we can like be together? And she was like, bruh, my husband died a month ago and I have like a responsibility to these people. Like, I'm not leaving, but you can stay here with me. So I mean, bless his soul, poor little Wraith, just like, you're so cool. I just want to be around you. It was precious. Loved it. And Miss Ariane, I saw her at first, and she kind of like squashes this stupid display of like childish magic when these people basically flood this courtyard because they rerouted a river because they're crazy powerful, and they almost like start drowning people on accident during this celebration, and she's just like, gets rid of the water, no problem. And we find out how she used to work with the previous ruler of the Fray, and we get some inklings of stuff that happened in the past where this crazy powerful former Fray ruler made mountains and stuff in some of her battles, and the Fray were locked in battle with this almost like mole-like species called the Durg, and we really don't find out that much about them, but they do seem to have runes and magic that can block the Fray's magic. So I'm curious to see where that goes. But it was so much more, like, when I first started it, and I was just like, oh my god, this is so much fun, woo! And then it started getting like, oh, huh. And then you start finding out more and more about the lore, and then you start seeing, like, I wonder what's gonna happen with this dude who sits and watches this door. What is this door? What is behind the door? Why is Grindal such an ass? All of these things, like, oh, are the humans going to band together and go after the Fray? And like, what other magic is going on? Like, I am just so into it. It's just complicated enough that I find it super interesting, but it's also still such a fast and comfortable read. I blew through it in less than a day, like this whole like 400-page book. So I hope that if you've read it, that you loved it as much as me. Even if you didn't, I'd love to hear kind of your thoughts on the Legends of the First Empire series. And I'm also curious, did you read Rhyria Revelations and Chronicles first? and then Legends, or did you do Legends into Ryuria like I'm doing? Let's talk about it. This book is starting to sit firmly in my feels, but I'll be okay if you didn't like it. Just let's chat about it. I want to talk more about Age of Myth by Michael J. Sullivan. And that's all I have for you guys today. If you like this video, please give it a like. If you want to see more reviews and bookish stuff like this from me, please consider subscribing if you feel like you want to. Other than that, I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I'll talk to you again soon. Bye!